Hi, and welcome to Gender Nebulous episode 28. I can't believe I've actually got to 28.
I
It's
know, yeah.
Time has really flown by. So today's special guest is Paul Bloomer from Northern Ireland. Paul is a community member, LGBT public sector. Welcome, Paul.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So yeah, it's been. I wanted to get you on the podcast for a while because I follow you on Twitter, and I love the stuff you put out. Very positive stuff. And I first heard about you from the Attitude magazine video, and I think that was when I thought, well, because I didn't know really how to talk about inclusion within you know, public services and hate crimes and things like that. So when I saw this, it felt like a really positive thing. So do you want to talk about that? And
Thanks. Yeah, well, that's why we did the video. We did the video to showcase who we are as people and to put across some positive messaging. When it was done on the sort of the back of a promotional piece, really, for the film My Policeman, which is,
yeah,
it follows a sort of a bisexual or queer police man back in the 1950s. And what they wanted to do with that was to show the change that there's been in the institution since the
mm,
1950s to now.
mm,
And when you think about it, when you go back to the 1960s, and Stonewall was essentially a riot against police and state oppression.
mm,
And then we've gone through a journey where we've ended up where now there's police officers in uniform marching in pride. To me,
mm,
that's a full circle, and a
mm,
full circle is a revolution. So it is a
mm,
full revolution has happened in terms
yeah,
of the way that
mm,
the LGBT community is looked at by public services. We've gone from being outcasts and undesirables and all these other things to being actually treated as, with dignity and respect. And that's what
mm.
we wanted, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I think yeah, I think
I
it's
was.
really positive that we're there.
It also reminds me of there's still quite a long way to go. Because obviously when you put that video out, one of the things I noticed was kind of the negative backlash to it. And obviously, there's some really positive things. You could see people love the video. The people it was made for got it. But we saw this pile on, didn't we? From very specific, from some very specific places, and we know they're anti-trans, anti-LGBTQI, and that's the worst thing for it for me because it's very few people that can cause a massive pile on like that because
Mm.
some of these anti-LGBT accounts very big
Yeah.
and they've got their little foot soldiers and attack dogs. So I was wondering how that made you feel, and is there anything you've done to counter that, or if it does put you off putting things out there? Because I know it does sometimes put me off doing anything with work.
It makes me, yeah, when you see those reactions, yeah, I could say, oh, it doesn't affect me and I'm absolutely fine, but that would be a lie.
Mm,
Of course it affects me. Of course it upsets me. Just today I was the target of a lot of anti-LGBT, these accounts that do that, and the campaign groups. And I think that that's something that, whenever we look at this, if you're an LGBT person, a visible LGBT person, and you work in public services,
mm,
you can bet your bottom dollar that the minute you do anything visible, there
mm,
will be freedom of information requests into the service that you work for or the authority that you work for. There will be complaints, vexatious allegations. There'll be all these sorts of things, and this has happened to me in my
mm,
work, and it's also happened to LGBT people up and down this country who work in public services. And I don't think that there's an awful lot of public knowledge about that. I don't think that
mm,
that there's a general sort of consciousness that actually there
mm,
are anti-LGBT campaigners doing this. And sometimes it can look like this
mm.
is reflective of public sentiment. And what I really want to communicate, what I really want people to know, is that this isn't reflective at all of public sentiment.
Yeah,
These are specific groups that have a specific aim, and their aim is to create a chilling effect around LGBT issues. They want public services to withdraw from these issues. They want public services to step back from LGBT
to
communities.
put the
They
pressure on.
absolutely, they
Yeah,
want to create that chilling effect. And if they overwhelm those services with freedom of information requests, which police services in particular up and down this country are being absolutely swamped with freedom of information requests in relation to LGBT matters. And it's a deliberate tactic because they will know that the next time that there's a senior executive team meeting or that there's any sort of board discussion where they go, oh, there's an LGBT awareness day coming up. Well, maybe we won't do anything for that because we got lots of complaints, and that created a lot of work for people. So we'll just not do it,
And it also creates a lot of negativity around something that should be a celebration.
Exactly.
And where in the old days somebody might have written to the newspaper, now anybody can set up a Twitter account, sometimes multiple Twitter accounts, and then bombard, public Twitter pages. Like, I know this myself because I work with a diversity and inclusion team. They know when Pride is coming up. They know when it's Trans Awareness Week. They know when it's anything, if it's Black History Month, they know there's going to be they know when they put that thing out there, there's going to be a lot of, so there's a decision made, right? What do we want to put out because we want to get it right?
Yeah.
So the last people like me, and I don't know.
It's a good point you raised because my company's about to do a winter pride in Blackpool. They're one of the sponsors for that this coming weekend, actually. And they're already getting intelligence that maybe there's going to be some kind of protests around, certain issues. So, yeah, I mean, you have to be aware of these things. I was just going to ask you though, Paul, is most of the abuse that you get, is it online based or is it actually in person?
It's mostly online, but it's definitely translated across to the real world, and that comes in the form of complaints to my employer and freedom of information requests. That's the real world knock on that it has on me, is that I'm sort of constantly dealing with these things, and it is really demoralizing, but at the same time it's very galvanizing because it just lets me know that the work that we're doing is important, and that we can't back down. To back down and turn, and walk away in the face of hate is the absolute worst thing that you can do because you're letting it win, and we can't let hate win. We have to be united as a community. We have to be united, in other ways, and support each other, lift each other up, and just not letting the public discourse be dominated by this hate. We have to keep putting ourselves out there, and that's why I've lots of admiration for you, Vicky, and for you, Frida, as well, for like stepping into that space. I can't imagine what it's like to be a trans person at the moment.
I think the way I deal with it is because I know there's like people have said to me, "Come off Twitter, forget about it, don't." But I'm not going to be bullied away from a social space where I know beautiful, wonderful people I never would have met any other way. I'm not going to be bullied away from that. No way.
And a good point is the three of us wouldn't have met each other without Twitter, would we?
Yeah. So
there you go.
I mean, it's like anything. It's like if I got harassed in town, I'm still going to go to town.
Yeah.
I'm not. Yeah. And also another thing that really annoys me, and you've probably noticed this, Paul, is the attitude is when we do Pride events in uniform, people will say, "Oh, you're wasting valuable resources. You're wasting wasting time." It's like, well, actually, no. It's people like We Are Fair Cop that are wasting time, calling for freedom of information requests and harassing people constantly.
Well, I know anytime I've ever done Pride, I've done it in my own time because that's how, and most police services are like that up and down the country. A few of them will allow it to be done on duty time, but most of them, it's you do this in your own time, and that's mainly to deal with that argument that this is a waste of police resources.
Well, yeah.
Because it's no different to private companies like mine. We what the things I do for that company, it's on my time. They might pay for expenses when you have to travel somewhere, but it's on my time.
The thing is, though, for me, when I was young, I never saw a positive trans role model. If I'd have seen a trans ambulance worker, a trans nurse, or a trans police officer, when I was little, that would have meant the world to me, because it would show me
Same
that
here.
another a life is possible. Because if you're a child and you're constantly told, oh yeah, transvestites and all that work, gay people are weird, and you'll never be happy if you do anything outside the status quo. If you want a good job, you've got to keep in line. And it's like, no, you can still be an effective member of society and express who you are. It doesn't mean that I'm going to turn up to work wearing false eyelashes and a wig.
Why not?
Why not? I do it all the time.
Well, you know what I mean. There's this perception that we're some kind of ridiculous sideshow.
Oh, Frida, I'm so glad you've said that, because that's why I do what I do. I do what I do because I remember what it's like to be a terrified teenager, to think that you're the only person like you in the whole wide world, to feel that isolation, that loneliness. It's horrifying, it's awful, and it's, I struggled a lot as a kid with that, and that's what I'm so delighted now that there's so many positive queer role models around us, but we need to be everywhere because we belong everywhere. We're part of society. We belong in every aspect of society.
Yeah.
So the institutions and the structures that support society, things like the ambulance service, the police, government, local government, the civil service, all those things need to be reflective of the public, and we need to be represented in those organizations.
Yeah, one of our recent podcasts was on about representation. We really kind of went into that topic quite deeply around, when you're doing your whatever you do during the day, do you bump into people that represent you? I mean, it's very rarely where you see another trans person.
It's so important. Role models are massively important, and Vicky and Frida, you are role models, and there's young trans people that you will never meet and will never know that are looking up to you, that are listening to this podcast, probably terrified and alone. And this podcast is probably a little light in the dark for them. And so just keep doing what you're doing.
Well, it's what, it's really small things that matter to me, because I remember speaking to somebody at work, somebody I was caring for that then, and I think they probably clocked that I was trans, but they didn't do it in a nasty way. And they talked to me about it, and they said, I've got a nephew who I think might be trans. And I said, well, if he wants to talk to you about it. And I put this lady in touch with some resort, signposted her to some. I said, if there's a lot of help out there if you want it. And it's like that interaction kind of, I think it's that kind of thing that's important. It's not about being on Twitter necessarily, although, it's really good to put positive things out there. But those little interactions where people recognize that because of your unique perspective, it could be anything that gives you a different perspective on life. People gravitate towards that. And I think that's what makes these people feel threatened sometimes, because they know that if you want to talk about diversity and inclusion, you have to talk to us.
Yeah.
And you have to talk to ethnic minorities, and you have to talk to people like that, because if you don't, you won't learn anything. So they'll call it wokery. It drives me mad, but they call it wokery, and the reason they do that is because they're frightened of it.
They want to, I get the feeling that certainly from a lot of the groups and the campaigners that are saying that have these kinds of messages, that they don't want these conversations to happen. And one of the things they talk about protecting young people. I'm like, protecting them from what?
Yeah, exactly.
Good question.
There was a particular group that called the National LGBT Police Network called us groomers. And said that we were trying to indoctrinate children, and it's like, that's absolute nonsense. But I do absolutely have a message, for young people, and that is, you can be yourself. And if you and who you are is queer or trans or bi or lesbian or whatever you are, you can be that, and you can achieve whatever you want to in life. And that's not a bad message to give to anybody. It's not a bad message to tell people that you're okay to be yourself.
I always say one of my favorite phrases is a high tide lifts all boats.
Exactly.
So when you do good things for minorities, it doesn't just help those minorities, it helps everyone, because you never know what's going on with somebody, and they might not be able to talk. There's a big problem with male suicide at the moment. And I know a lot of them men might not be gay, they might not be on that spectrum, but if they see us talking about how we feel and they can see the struggle I've had. They
Mhm.
might be able to relate to it.
Yeah.
So that's what I was trying to say then. It's like the reason that these lobby groups like LGBT Alliance, they always concentrate on kids because they'll say that, you know, it's like this, it's like they believe there's some kind of infiltration into the media. You know, like they'll see something like Kim Petras and think it's like the worst thing that could possibly happen to them. But it's like, no, it's just you know, bit of fun.
But they mention that because it brings about a primal reaction because people have an instinctive want and need to protect kids. Everybody does that. So
Oh yeah.
if you create a sense of alarm around that, then of course you're going to motivate and galvanize people. But the truth is that like I mean the majority of the LGBT organizations and things like that, especially LGBT youth groups and trans youth groups and organizations like Mermaids, they're not, there's no such thing as conversion therapy into making someone trans
No.
or gay or anything. You just
so
are these things.
yeah,
You need to have a framework and an environment for people to be able to be themselves. If you
mm,
don't have that,
that's
then
right.
you get heightened levels of suicide, you get heightened levels of
Yeah,
depression and
exactly.
anxiety.
Yeah.
So we need that those organizations exist to give that free framework for young people to be themselves.
So that's the thing they never talk about. What happens to kids when you don't support them? What are the consequences of that?
You know, there was all that controversy about mermaids last year, and obviously they're under investigation. But somebody told me that more kids have been damaged and hurt by Junior Bake Off than mermaids. So which is, there
What
is
the heck's
no
been going on in Junior Bake Off? Pray tell.
well, they get burnt, you know, they're not, you know,
Oh,
they
right.
get the fingers, they cut the fingers.
Mm.
That's what I'm saying. There's been no report of a child being
No.
damaged by mermaids or harmed in any way.
I think it's important to mention before we, get into some more topics that Paul, you're here as yourself. You're not representing any organizations or anything.
That's right.
You're just here talking freely.
Yes.
There was something I wanted to talk about. You remember there was a recent show that Frida was on. I can't remember which topic it was, but you left a really nice message at the end because you heard it on the radio.
Yeah, I did. I heard Frida on talk radio, and I try not to listen to it, but I can't help myself sometimes.
Yeah, that was that Susan Smith.
Susan Smith, yeah. I can't remember what the topic was now, but it was...
She was from For Women Scotland. It was about the GRA, you know, the Gender Recognition Act.
And it just really moved me to hear a trans voice in that space.
Yeah.
Really, and you did a brilliant job, of advocating for fairness and inclusion, which is just all that people want. And I just thought you did a brilliant job of that. And
well, it made my day when you sent me that, because like when I went on there, I thought, am I doing the right thing here? Because am I causing trouble? Because sometimes I think when I go on something like that, obviously I represent myself, but people see trans person and I think, oh God, did I say the right thing? Because we get a lot of tone policing and people saying, oh, you didn't use the right phraseology. And I'm really bad at that. Honestly, I'll be the first person to say I do make mistakes. But I thought I can't, because I've been invited to go on those things again. And recently I've kind of thought I don't necessarily want to do it because of the hate I got on Twitter after doing it, because it really came for me.
Yeah, I think and this is one of the reasons why I reached out to you, is because I really think it's important that we raise each other up as a community, that we remember that, the people that are sticking their neck out in the line are doing it with a certain amount of personal risk. And I mean, that I seen that in you, and that's why I wanted to reach out to you to let you know that you did a good job. And I do that frequently with people. If I see somebody putting out like good positive messages, I'll drop them a line and saying, what you're doing is great, keep doing it. Because all too often you only hear the negativity, you don't hear the positivity, you don't hear from the people that you've positively affected. And like, I had a really wonderful experience like not too long ago in my work, where one of my students came up to me and said, I was inspired to join the police because of you. And
Wow.
I went, wow. I was, oh, that's great, thanks very much. And then I took 10 steps down the corridor and then burst into tears. But it's like, that one, that's the only, like, I don't really hear
Mm,
that positivity. I
mm,
hear a lot of the negativity. I get the complaints. I get the
mm.
freedom of information requests. I get all this
Yeah.
crap dumped on me. And it just to have that one person come up to me and say that, it meant the word to
Mm.
me. So we need to do that for each other, and we need to
Well,
Yeah.
remember
I
we're a
do.
community.
Well, Frida
And
you did
yeah,
have her in tears after that message. So I just,
okay.
Well, I did.
Brilliant.
I mean, it's a really weird thing at work because it can either be the worst day ever because you've had a bit of a, altercation. If you're working with the public, if you're front line, you do get that. And then other days, people say the most wonderful things to you. So you're always in this constant state of being really high
again, yeah.
or being on your knees. So
Yeah.
it's like, it's very rare. There's like as a middle ground. Because so there was one case, well, I can't talk about individual cases where people I've worked with, but just having an argument with somebody for no reason really, that just, but then on the same day, when I was at Manchester Children's Hospital, a mother said, "Say thank you to the ambulance lady," to her daughter. And I thought, oh my God, that's like gender euphoria.
Yeah, it's the little things, isn't it? It's the little things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That made me cry. And I was like, oh my God, stop it, Frida.
Trans police officers doing strip searches and whether this should be allowed or not. Now, yeah, we kind of looked into it at a time, and we didn't really know what the answer was, but it kind of breaks when you look at the detail behind it. There's like different levels to strip searches, and it's very controlled as to what level of officer can do at what stage, and if it goes to an intimate search, it has to be done in a medical setting by a medical professional, etc.
That's correct. Yeah.
So, Paul, I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit around how that process works from your perspective.
Well, there's just a lot of safeguarding put in place. Like you never search somebody on your own, and generally, like, search policy is really different. It varies all across the country. A lot of different police services have very different approaches to this. There is some national guidance around it from the National Police Chiefs Council, and I'm very, very supportive of that guidance because nobody's compelled to do anything, and there's a lot of safeguarding put in place. There's safeguarding put in place for the officers concerned, and there's safeguarding put in place for the public as well. If a member of the public doesn't want to be searched by a particular officer, they can ask for somebody else to do the search, and that's fine. And most services have an element of that within their policy. So
so anybody who doesn't want to be in that situation, either an officer or a member of the public, they can request for somebody else to do it or step out of it if they're the officer themselves.
Exactly. If you're a trans police officer and you're not comfortable doing a search, then you shouldn't be forced to search anybody. I think that the gender critical debate for some people has been a useful platform to because it doesn't seem to carry any risk if you put yourself out there as a gender critical person. And I have by the way, I just want to say I disagree with a lot of stuff that gender critical people say, but I don't have any problem with gender critical people. And when it comes to doing my job or anything like that, all members of the public, I treat people impartially and I treat everybody fairly.
But you wouldn't know, would you, if somebody was gender critical?
Exactly, you wouldn't know.
Whereas somebody would know I was trans, or they might, they might be able to pick up some characteristic about you.
Even if I knew, I still wouldn't, you wouldn't treat anybody differently because of that, because that would be highly immoral and against the code of ethics. So it's not something that I would do. But I do think that it's a platform that seems to be quite useful for people, and it seems to be, like I say, a way of being able to that there's no risk attached to sort of nailing your colors to that particular post. You can get involved with this without really damaging or you're tarnishing your reputation, and you will boost your profile. It seems to be what a lot of people have used it for.
Yeah, and there doesn't seem to be any accountability, and there's a lot of grifting going on around it as well. People setting up crowdfunders for this and that, and that's what I notice a lot around certain lobby groups, because they set up these lobby groups to put pressure on the government or whatever they're supposed to do, but they don't seem to have any sort of realistic aims. They just, when you look at it purely if you break down what they say, they just don't like trans people, or they don't like LGBTQI, whatever people.
The thing is that like a lot of the surface level arguments are really, they're things that everyone would agree with. Well, we believe in safety for women. Well, yeah, okay. Well, everyone agrees with that. We believe that women's spaces should be for women only. Oh yeah, well, we all agree with that. But then
Yeah.
you start to get into what that actually means, and then
Yeah.
you're right. It doesn't. There's a surface level argument, and then when you go beneath that, it's just we don't like trans people,
Yeah.
and there seems to be a lot of that, going on there. Now, I'm not saying every gender critical person's like that, but this is the messaging from a lot of these campaign groups.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I'm sure there's some very reasonable people out there with gender critical beliefs, but we don't tend to hear from them. We just tend to hear from very angry sounding, hateful commentary from certain groups and certain commentators.
well, they've tapped into a kind of online hate that seems permissible. So, like the small accounts on Twitter will latch onto these things because they can spend an evening slagging people off on Twitter, and that becomes like a sport to them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no comeback. There's no accountability for them. And they're the people that seem to make up the core of the followers of these bigger accounts. So like when we post something, we're trying to do something positive for the community, they all pile on it and they bring all those people with them.
And I think that there's some people that have jumped onto the gender critical bandwagon who aren't necessarily gender critical, but are anti-LGBT
Oh
in
yeah.
general.
Well, they just
And
anti everything.
yeah, and that seems to be, it's a platform, it's a vehicle for that discourse as well. And it's really difficult. But like the thing is, and I seen this in some of the commentary online today about me was, how could anybody feel safe around him? How could anyone with gender critical beliefs feel safe around him? And the thing is that the truth is I'm there for everybody. I'm there for every member of the
Yeah.
community. And,
Mm.
I would help anybody in need, and I would do my job to the fullest extent of my abilities to help anyone, including gender critical people if they
Mm.
needed it. And I think the people that say that don't really understand what public service is. Public
Mm.
service means that you're there for everybody impartially. And while there's plenty of people who I disagree with and people who hold all sorts of beliefs, because people who hold, there's people who are very close to me who hold very fundamentalist religious beliefs, but they're very close to me, and are people I love and care for in my life. And I disagree with them, but that doesn't mean that we have to hate each other. And I
Mm.
think that there's a lot of that nuance and a lot of that subtlety is lost.
Mm.
Yeah, I disagree with gender critical viewpoints, but I don't hate gender critical people. I don't
Mm.
want to see them all hurt or harmed or anything like that. I want to have that discussion. I want to have that debate, and I want to see a society where everybody can actually, just be themselves and be safe. If you want to have a gender critical viewpoint and that's your thing and you want to do that, then great, do that.
That's great.
But don't use it against other people. Don't use it to hurt people. And
Oh
it's the
yeah.
same. Like if you're like a trans rights activist, that's great. Great, advocate for that as well.
Mm.
But don't use that to hurt people. And
Yeah.
I say that to both sides, because I see some nasty campaigning from both sides, but at the same
Mm.
time, I know where I'm getting the hassle from, and it's not from my community. I get the hassle from certain campaign groups that have aligned
Mm.
themselves with a certain viewpoint. And that's really disappointing. And I'm open for that discussion. But I would just love to see more tolerance, really.
The main thing that always comes up again and again, whenever I try and argue, see, I can have an argument if somebody wants to argue about it, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be trans, what that, I can have that conversation with somebody. It's not about hate. We can all sit round and say, look, what does this mean? Because we don't all, just because we're trans, we're not the experts in our own condition. We want to talk about it, but we can't talk to people if the first thing that comes out of their mouth is "you're a bloke." We can't have that and that's what it's like on Twitter. So
there's no respectful. There's no like.
Oh,
This is one of the things, like one of the particular groups that targets up me quite a bit. one of their main spokespeople says, I'm just here for respectful debate, and then immediately prefaces everything that they say with something really quite nasty, and it's like, how are you saying that you're wanting respectful debate when the first thing that comes out of your mouth is something hateful?
I'm always asking people for debates. Like, there are people on Twitter, I say, right, well, if you want to talk to me, have the debate. But it's really hard to do that. And then when I've done those TV things, it's really hard. You're not having a debate because the presenters control the narrative. So
most of those TV things are setups and they're not debates.
So what I've got to do is I've got to have everything written down, that like the points I want to hit. And sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not, because sometimes I'm too defensive, because obviously I've got a dog in the fight. Do you know what I mean? And I want to win it. That's not the best tactics sometimes. You know what I mean?
You've got to go in cool-headed, haven't you, when you do those things?
I'm not a very cool-headed person.
No, I've noticed.
But it's really hard to be cool-headed whenever you're debating your own existence.
Yeah, exactly.
Your own right to exist. It's really, really difficult. And I can understand why a lot of trans people get really, really animated and really upset and really, engaged with that debate, because it's your existence that's being debated here. It's your own right to life. And like that's there's nothing more precious than that.
So a couple of other topics I wanted to talk about. One was a personal thing that happened to me, and it was to do with I was in Pink News around an issue with Centre Parks where I was wanting to use the changing rooms, but got into a bit of a dispute with Centre Parks over that. I had to get legal advice, but myself, the legal people in Centre Parks sorted it out, and they apologised and everything was fine in the end. But the issue that came up was that this was discussed in great detail on Mumsnet, and I was trolled like crazy on Mumsnet with thousands of comments. I did report this to the police, and after a few weeks, months, they didn't do anything. They kind of said, "There's nothing we can do about it. There's difficulties with moving the case forwards." I didn't really get a satisfactory kind of solution or outcome. I mean, I didn't really want anybody to lose their jobs over anything like that, or get prosecuted. I just wanted the main instigators to be told, you shouldn't be doing that. It's online hate. And there's some really hateful comments. They were posting pictures of me and my family members on Mumsnet. So that was one thing.
It's awful.
Yeah, I don't know what you think about that, Paul, but
I think it's horrible. I think
it is. But how do you get the police to do something about some of these hate crimes, whether they're like the one I kind of experienced, which you could say was a crime or an incident? I don't really know the difference. Or other people do this all the time. It's like, how do you get action?
The difference, right? Okay, so difference between a hate crime and a hate incident. A hate crime is where there's an actual a criminal offence is taking place, and a hate incident is any incident that's motivated by prejudice or hate. So every hate crime is a hate incident, but not every hate incident is a hate crime, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult. Like, I mean, I think there's still a lot of work being done in and around, the sort of the area of online hate. And like I say, I've been targeted, myself, by a lot of stuff. And the thing, I remember talking to a friend about it. It was getting particularly harassed really by one particular person there. And I was talking to a friend about it, and they said to me, well, what would your advice be to any member of the public? What would your advice be to anybody that came to you and told you about this? What would you tell them to do? And I said, well, I'll tell them to report it to the police. I said, well, why aren't you doing that? So that was exactly what I ended up doing. And I think that's what's really important. You've got to report these things, because not everybody's an expert in the law, and not everybody's an expert in things that are, in what's happening to them. But they need to be able to access support, and reporting things to the police is actually it's one way of accessing support. I mean, certainly there might not be a crime there. There might not be anything, from an investigative point of view or criminal justice point of view that the police can do. But what they can do is signpost you to support services. You can direct you to, hate crime advocates or victim support or community groups in your area that are able to provide that. And that's why, but it feeds into that intelligence picture about what's happening. I mean, we know that, there's a lot of science that says that increasing hate speech leads to an increase in hate incidents and hate crimes. The science behind that is really well established and goes back to the 1950s, with Gordon Allport and his scale of prejudice. It goes right back from those studies back in the 1950s up to modern day criminology studies. There is that causal link between increasing hate speech and crime.
So even though something may not be done about it, or there's some kind of difficulty in prosecuting, is it still worthwhile to report?
Absolutely.
Just for the stats.
Not just for the stats, but also for the support that you would be able to gain access to, but the statistics are important because the statistics let us know where to direct resources to, and we can't direct resources to something if we don't know about it. I mean, there could be, let's say there's a lot of incidents happening in a particular area. Well, there might be something that we can do about that. You might be able to send people to that area to deal with it. You might be able to do something proactive around it. Let's say all these incidents are happening around a particular workplace or a school or an institution. Well, actually, maybe we could go into that place and give some education and give some awareness training, and actually maybe that would help prevent further ones happening. So there's lots of reasons as to why you should report these things. Yes, it might not be a crime and there might not be anything, criminal justice wise that, in terms of an outcome, but it's still important. The information's still important, and the support that you would gain from it is important as well.
I was going to mention there was a very famous case in Manchester, a girl called Sophie Lancaster, and it was a very horrific case, quite extreme. She was targeted and assaulted and murdered, and her boyfriend beaten. She died
because she was a goth, yeah.
Yeah, and after that incident, the police decided, because what was known was this bullying and harassment had been going on for some time, but nobody reported anything because they just thought that's just how it is. You just get on with it, and the parents were like, didn't really take it seriously at the time, and the police in Manchester set up an hate crimes incident space in Manchester city centre because there used to be like emo kids and goth kids would congregate and they were getting attacked by a very specific other group of people. And so what the police managed to do was lower the incident rate simply by being present in those spaces. Now, I know that's a very extreme case, but what it reminds me of is, like you said, if you don't report anything, you might not get somebody prosecuted, you might not get somebody accountable, but if the police know what's going on, they might stop something like Sophie Lancaster from happening.
Exactly.
And that's the hope.
Yeah. So Sophie's case is it's particularly tragic, and it was really sad that her mum died just a couple of years ago there, because her mum was such an amazing campaigner for her and for on behalf of hate crime. And hate crime is something that I'm particularly interested in because I've been a victim of it. When I was 18, I was gay bashed outside one of the gay bars in Belfast, and I never forget that one of the first things the police officers said to me whenever I didn't call the police, actually it was somebody else, because I ran into one of the bars to get help, because I had my nose broke and splattered all over my face. And one of the first things the police officer said was, "Oh, well, what did you do to anger him? What did you do to like it was immediately put on to me." And I just remember thinking, just feeling this small, and like I was the victim of crime. I'd just been assaulted for absolutely no reason, simply because of who I was and where I was, and that police officer made me feel like nothing. And one of the sort of the things that I'm really motivated by is that nobody else ever feels that way. And I know it still happens, and I know that but I think it happens to a lesser degree now, and I think that there's a lot more awareness, and it's about continuing on with that work and making sure that whenever victims of crime are being dealt with, that they're being dealt with sympathetically, with understanding and knowledge on the people that are there to protect them.
They just do not understand what it's like to get the night bus home from a club as a young person. Like I used to do that all the time, get on the train, you know, and you knew you were taking a risk when you did that. If you were traveling at a certain time, even if you were with your friends, if there happened to be a football match on the same time, if you got on the train at the wrong time, you knew you were going to get something. And people just kind of thought, oh, it's just how it is, it's how, you just got to grin and bear it. I was like, no, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do that. You have to get the
No.
police. You have to get the British Transport Police to sort it out.
Yeah,
And
exactly. People should be able to go about their daily lives and not get harassed or assaulted or be victimized constantly. You should be able to go about your daily life and not feel those things. And if something like that happens to you, it shouldn't be normalized. It needs to be addressed. And I think that when we diminish these things and we normalize them, then it's not just us that we're affecting by doing that. It can have a knock-on effect on other people as well. So yeah, I think it's really important to make a stand and report these things, because nothing will change if we just don't do anything about it.
Yeah. What do you think about the attitude of some police officers? We've seen some pretty horrendous things going on in the Met over the past recent months and years. And then there's this thing with no police at Pride. That is a theme I hear a lot when I go to Prides. And it may be related to some of these kind of negative things we've heard.
Well, look,
I just wonder what you thought about.
I can say that throughout my time and throughout my career and stuff, the people that I've worked with have been brilliant. I have worked with some really dedicated people that are absolutely, fantastic public servants that care about the public and work really hard. I think the vast majority of police officers are like that. They're people that really care. You don't go into the job because you want to be a bully. You don't go into the job because you want to put your boot into the neck of oppressed people. You join the job because you want to help people. You want to keep people safe. And I think that's what the majority of people go into the job to do. But because of the position and the power and things with it, I think then that job can also be attractive to people who don't necessarily hold those good values. But that's why we have accountability measures. That's why we have professional standards departments. That's why we have anti-corruption teams and all these units that are and certainly in Northern Ireland, there's the police ombudsman, an independent body that's there to look at and investigate the police. That's really important. That's why we have those accountability structures. That's why we have that vetting to weed those people out. There's good and bad in every profession. I mean, we all hear about doctors that transgress and nurses that do horrendous things. These things happen. They tend not to reflect on the institution the same way that stuff happens in the police. Like nobody would say, well, all doctors are bad because this one doctor, killed one of his patients or harmed one of his patients. But people tend to treat the police slightly differently in that. I think, in that regard. And it's absolutely right that we're held to a higher standard. It's absolutely right that we are, that we're held to account, of course. But at the same time, I would just like to remind people that the vast majority of police officers are very dedicated public servants who care about what they do.
I just wanted to say, because it has been in the press and a lot of negativity. And I think to me, it comes down to misogyny. And it's the same misogyny that affects trans people, trans women especially. And I find that, I know I've talked about lobby groups quite a lot, but these people that campaign who are anti-trans, they're adopting the same stance, the same misogynistic stance to me, because they're turning people into a target. And when you see that, we could talk about really extreme cases like Wayne Couzens, but to me, the reason that people like Wayne Couzens go undetected is because we live in a culture of misogyny where things are acceptable that shouldn't be acceptable. So, I can imagine that I would love to think that somebody like him would be rooted out really quickly from any organisation.
I would like to think that any police officer attending a Pride event is there because they want to be there and then they want to join in a little bit, and as well as protecting the public, like at any normal kind of large event where lots of people are around. We do hear a lot of, we don't want police at Pride. I don't know if that's based on specific incidents or what, but
well, look, I can understand and respect the community's calls to, for that. But I would say that, police being in Pride, to me, it's symbolic of like the journey that society has been on. Like I said, it started off with, police stars, we go back to Stonewall, and that, police were oppressing, the protests at Stonewall were a reaction against police oppressive tactics and state oppression of LGBT people. And we've gone from that to police actually being part of Pride and police embracing the community and being more reflective of the community. That's a victory. That's something that we strove for, and that's something that we've achieved.
Absolutely.
And I think we sort of forget that sometimes. We can walk away from it. But it's interesting, I hear calls from people in the community saying, look, we don't want police in Pride. Police, we've got to think about the most vulnerable people in our community, trans women and sex workers and ethnic minorities aren't safe around police. And then whenever I talk to, like, for instance, I was at a conference in Greece there last year, and I was talking to a trans woman who's the head of the sex worker safety union in Athens, and she said that, well, police have been banned from the pride parade there, and the justification was because of how police treat trans sex workers. She said they never came and spoke to me. Nobody came and spoke to me and asked me what I wanted. And she said, I want police in the parade because the police that I see in the parade, I know aren't the problem. They're the ones that I know I can go to if I need help. And like, that was really powerful to me because I'd never thought of it like that before, that actually, I think if you're gonna take a position on something, do it in an informed way. Don't do it because you're jumping on a bandwagon. Take a position because you've actually spoken to the people that are directly affected by those issues and you are supporting their position. Don't be a savior. Don't appoint yourself the leader and the savior of a particular group. Go and talk to that group and find out what they really want, because it might not be what you think.
I was listening to an interesting discussion on the radio as I was driving into work the other day, and it was around the term police force and how maybe it should be police service. I don't know if you've heard this argument.
It's an old discussion. It's long.
Yeah,
the word
but
force
it kind of
long
tags
gone.
on to what we were saying there.
Yeah, no, but it is. But language affects everything. Like how we talk about something, can affect our attitudes towards it, and that's why if you sort of change your language around it, then you can change a bit of thought process around it too. And that's why I'm a big advocate of like having respectful conversations, because if you see people as human beings, you're more likely to treat them with respect and empathy.
Absolutely, yeah.
And always remember that the person what you are engaging with is a human being, and that person's worthy of respect and dignity and all those things.
It's kind of an old-fashioned idea that it's like we want the bobbies to go and catch the criminals. It's like a really simplistic, unrealistic view of what crime prevention or policing is. It's like you see it a lot, like I've said before, people talk about things being woke. We don't want to be too soft on the criminals. It's like, well, I'm sorry your bike got nicked, but there are trans people getting beaten up over it.
Yeah.
But that's my attitude. You know what I mean?
Well, there's definitely an element of like running out and catching criminals. Absolutely, that's like that is an important part of it, and it's very satisfying when you get to do that. But the thing that I find just in my experience, and there's some be an element of the research that would back this up as well, is that the one thing that victims want more than anything is, yes, they want some sort of outcome. That's generally part of it. But the main thing that most victims want is they want to be treated with dignity and respect. They want to feel like they're understood, that they're treated, that their complaint is being taken seriously, that they are being heard. And, actually, a lot of the time, it's not necessarily about a criminal justice outcome. They want
Mm.
to make the report and they want to be treated with respect. And yes, a criminal justice outcome's really nice and is a really good thing, and it's something that we would strive that anyone would strive for, but it's not the be all and end all.
Mm.
Dignity and respect's one of the main things.
Yeah, and people think about it in that simplistic way. I mean, I was going to say, when you read the papers, it's very rare you see somebody who's powerful being brought to account, or there's a financial fraud. It's very rare that people with money get brought to account, but it's usually the people on the street. And this is why people have a problem with the police, I think, because they see that disparity of disenfranchised people. I'm not justifying robbery. I'm not justifying what people do to get drugs or whatever it is they need to do. But people observe the fact that it's society that the police have to deal with what they have on the street. You know what I mean? It's very much a sort of frontline job, isn't it? So I think that people sometimes see that too simplistically and think, oh, well, the police are picking on the little guy. Do you know what I mean? It's and they're not going for the big, they're not, the people that are committing financial fraud always get away with it.
How do you see things improving going forwards with this, the police and how they're perceived by the LGBTQ plus community? And, have you got any kind of ideas as on what things are being worked on in that kind of area?
I think, I think a lot of progress has been made, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah.
I mean, policing's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. I mean, what policing is now is totally different to what it was 20 years ago, and it's completely different to what it was 50 years ago. And I think that's positive, and I think that, you know, when you look at most police services up and down the country, I think nearly all of them have like a department that's called something like development or change or transformation or something like that, and those teams are constantly looking at ways of like, how do we do this better? What do we need to change? Do we need to reinvent the policy here? Do we need to look at what we do we need to, how do we do this job better, basically, and how do we serve the public better? And I think that's ultimately the big question. And there's probably no right answer to that. The answer to that is to continually change. The answer to that is to continually evolve and grow, because society's evolving and growing,
Yeah.
evolving and growing. And the trouble is that a lot of the problems that affect society, police can't solve on their own. They're massive problems that require huge, education efforts. They require structural change. They require legislative change. There's a lot of stuff to that. So I think if we isolate it down to the LGBT community, what could we do? I think the police, they need to not back away from it. They need to not back away from the LGBT community in the face of these anti-LGBT campaigners who are trying to create this chilling effect. That's my sort of appeal to police services up and down the UK and beyond, actually, as well, is don't back away from the community. Don't give in to
Pressure.
don't give in to sort of spurious and vexatious arguments which aren't really based on any sort of evidence or any sort of public sentiment. They're based on a fringe group, that are trying to isolate a vulnerable community. And I think that that's really important, that police services don't back away from those things. I think it's going to be difficult with budget cuts and things like that. You're going to see reductions in officer numbers, and we're going to see, the things that are nice to haves, the coffee with a cop and the pizza with a peeler. I think those things are going to sort of, I think we're going to see less of those things, unfortunately, because of the resourcing picture, because of the decrease in funding. I think that's going to have a real negative impact on community engagement, community policing. But I would say that the low cost stuff, things like Pride, where officers are doing stuff in their own time, don't back away from those things. Keep doing them because they mean something and they're important. And I'd say to the community, be open to discussion around this rather than taking a blanket position. Talk if you have concerns about what's going on, have concern, think about what you're doing, and are you taking this position because of a specific case? Are you taking this position because a community member of the group that you're concerned for has asked you for this, or are you a member of that group and this is your honestly held belief? You know, just think about what you're doing and why you're doing it, rather than just sort of going along with the position. um that's oh God, I kind of went on a ramble there. I'm sorry.
Isn't it? No,
Sorry.
it's just
Can you
great.
edit that out? Can you?
No, it's great. I love
No,
the
we'll keep it like that. We'll keep that.
I love the positive
Yeah, it's
outlook you
positive.
have. You know, you obviously you're aware of the problems, and I'm sure we could talk about budgets and all that boring stuff. But the fact that you're encouraging, you're positive about the job, I think that's amazing to me. So,
I'm a big believer in the institution, and I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but like I am actually, because I've met so many good people in it, and I've met so many people that care, people that are really passionate about what they're doing and really care about communities and really stand up to protect those communities as well. It's people that have real empathy for the people that they're policing as such. And I've seen so much of that. I've seen so much good practice. It's like, yeah, I've seen some stuff that's not great, and I've seen some things that, that would bring embarrassment to the institution. Like, I mean, those things that end up in the media
mm,
frequently, but they really are small case. They are part of. They're not reflective, I think, of
mm,
the vast majority of the people that do the job.
Yeah.
And I
mm,
think we just need to remember that. And support the good police officers that are doing a good job, and support the police officers that are really community focused and human rights focused, and the ones that are transgressing, the ones that are abusive, the ones that are misogynists, racists, transphobes, homophobes, all the people that are hateful and act in that way, then they need rooted out of the job.
mm-hmm,
And it's not enough. I say this all the time, but I'm going to say it again. It's not enough for us to say, you know, it's not enough for us to say that we don't, oh, racism's bad. We can't have that. We need to actually be anti-racist. We need to be
mm,
actively against those
mm,
things. We need to be actively
mm,
against homophobia and transphobia and misogyny and ageism
Mhm.
and this and ableism and disableism and all
Yeah.
of those things. I could go on for it forever, but it's we need to be active in
mm,
those things. And I think that my appeal to the community and to the public is support good police officers that are community focused and human rights focused and care, and call out the bad ones, absolutely. And
mm,
we'll get to a better place hopefully if we do that.
Yeah, and
mm,
you're doing all the things you do in the face of some really, pretty hard to read, hard to look at stuff on Twitter when you're getting abused by certain organizations on there. I mean,
And like I said, it does affect me.
yeah.
It absolutely does. It's demoralizing and it's depressing. And today, when all that stuff blew up on Twitter, and it's no accident that it
mm.
was today.
Hmm.
Today's the start of
Oh
LGBT
yeah,
History
yeah,
Yeah,
Month,
yeah, yeah.
and
yeah.
the post that they're picking on, I wrote it in October last year. So it's no accident that it was
Yeah.
today, because it's about subverting the positive narrative that we have around what we want to talk about around LGBT History Month. Where it's like, well, we're going to undermine that with this thing.
Mm.
And when you see all the stuff there, like, what was it somebody said? Oh, he needs his hard drives checking. I'm like, you're
Yeah,
welcome to
they,
come and
they
have a
always
look at
they
them,
always use
because
that one.
if
That's
you
a
want to
common one.
see if you want to see me, what you'll find on my hard drive is me looking at eBay auctions for model trains, and
You
like,
pervert.
like,
Yeah, if you look at
like
mine, you'll find
that's
like hundreds of podcast recordings. It's like, yeah,
like you find some pretty boring stuff, or you're in
yeah,
for a really
yeah.
dull evening if that's what you want to do,
Mm,
but like it's like that
mm,
association, like, I mean, that thing,
mm.
oh, he needs his hard drive checking.
Yeah, well,
What does that actually mean? You know what it
we know what
means?
it
Now
means.
we know what it
It's
means.
you're a pedophile,
Yeah,
and like that's what
Yeah.
they're
Well,
trying to.
this
It's a,
whole groomer thing, it's
yeah.
just so
But
aggressive.
it's such an old hackneyed argument. They were saying this about gay men back in the 1980s and 1990s. Gay men are all pedophiles. It's the same
We're just
old
recycling the
homophobia
old
brought
nonsense again,
yeah,
aren't we? Yeah,
it's just the same old
same old
nonsense
stuff.
being trotted out again,
Mm,
and it's like it's hard to rise above it. It's
mm,
hard to be apart from it, but I don't want to give in and I don't want to step away from those spaces because, like, you free to, have a right to be there and have a right to exist in these spaces.
mm. Well, you see, sometimes I go in for it because I just will not stand by and let, you know what I mean? I think I'm wasting my time arguing with these people. But when I see
Well, yeah,
when I see negative comments on stuff that you post, it's really hard for me not to react, and I know I shouldn't, but you know,
I just try not to engage. I did for a while. I got into debating with people, on these things, and then it never goes well. It never
no,
goes well.
no,
Like
It's difficult
you're
to know
never.
which approach to take, isn't it? Like you can engage or you can just ignore and block. I
Yeah,
mean,
well, that's what I do now. I just
yeah,
block, and because
well,
I feel I feel it keeps me safer than
mm,
trying
yeah,
to
exactly.
engage
So
because
it keeps the individual safer. It keeps the followers of that individual safer.
yeah,
It's I
and
think overall, yeah,
I think
blocking is probably the way to go. But I
mm,
understand Frida's point as well, where you feel like you need to
well,
interject sometimes.
if I know, obviously, if it's somebody with like 2 followers, I'm not going to bother. But there are some quite powerful accounts out there, quite a lot of followers, and I keep my eye on them. They have a little list, and I check them now and again. And I do screenshots of them sometimes, because I write a blog, and I write quite a lot of what I call the turf Reich, and it's my way. It's like my personal way of making a diary, and it kind of helps me process it because it's like I'm making a mockery of their world,
yeah.
and that's how I deal with it. So like I write with a kind of humor in my voice, but there's a very serious element to it as well. I feel like I'm documenting what is happening. And if anybody was to say, well, what's all this turf thing about? I'll say, have a read of this. Check.
Documenting the hate.
I do feel like there
Mm,
needs to be some resources created
mm,
for people who are on the receiving end of these vexatious complaints and freedom of information requests. I think that we need that's something I really would love to see
mm,
some work done around creating those resources so that people can just hand that stuff over. Right,
mm,
okay, you're investigating me for this complaint, please factor this
Yeah,
into
yeah.
your that is
mm,
something that really needs to happen.
mm,
You know Probably end up doing it myself, but and like I say, I really want to stress this. I don't, certainly not. I don't believe any one group or anything like that um isn't worthy of respect or isn't worthy to have their views heard or anything like that, or their views debated or discussed or anything like that. I
mm,
absolutely That's not what I believe at all. But I am the focus of a lot of anti-LGBT campaigners at the moment, and a lot of us are in the public space. I'm certainly not the only one that's getting this, and I feel like we need to talk about it, and we need to let the public know that this is happening, because I just don't think the awareness is out there of it.
mm.
So we've spoken quite a bit about what the police are doing and some of the issues around what the police do, but what would you say to the LGBTQ plus community? I mean, what do they need to do?
Lift
What
each
would be
other
your
up.
message to them? Yeah,
I think we need to I think sometimes our community can be a wee bit quick to turn on each other. I think sometimes we're very quick to, like, call people out and section somebody off and say, oh, this person's made a mistake, this person's transgressed, well, they're dead, that's and they're gone. And I think we're a little bit quick to do that sometimes, and we spend a lot of time as a community sometimes focused on each other, when actually, you know there's a bigger issue happening out
yeah.
there.
Mm,
you know
So we're all
there's
kind of
there's
fighting the same battle, but
yeah,
yeah,
there's people pushing to have our rights removed, and I think that we need to focus on that and bear in mind that there's a
mm,
bigger issue at play here,
mm,
and we need to look after each other as a community, raise each other up, reach out to each other if we see somebody getting a hard time. If you see somebody getting a hard time on Twitter, you don't have to step into the debate. You don't have to get involved, but you can reach out to that person and just say, "Are you okay?"
Yeah.
Or just, reach out to them and say, "You're doing a good job. Keep on doing it. Ignore the haters." I think if we did a wee bit more of that as a community, we'd all be a little bit healthier. And it's not just, I'm not just putting this on other people. I try to do it myself. And I know you do it, Frida, and Victoria, you're doing it through this podcast and stuff. I just think we need to remember that, act more like a community, look after each other, care about each other, and show support and mutual aid and solidarity with one another.
Yeah, and we do, we're not a homogenous group. We do have different opinions on certain things.
Yeah,
so
of course.
I think what can sometimes happen is, like, because we're aware that we are sharing the same experiences a lot of the time. So it's like we want to have a united front, to attack. So not everybody is on board with the same kind of, rhetoric. So like some of the things I say, like I know certain activists, and sometimes, oh, don't say that. No, like, you're going to get us in trouble if you say that. And I think, well, it's not my place to tell anybody what to say. But sometimes I think if you're going to attack people, you've got to do it. If you do it on what they say, don't do it on what you think they are. Just attack them. If you're going to call somebody out, somebody that's transphobic or whatever, my approach is, well, let's have a look at what they've actually said.
I think attack's probably the wrong word, and I don't think that's really what you mean either, Frida.
No, I'm not. I mean, when I say when we, like, say if there's a very specific person who's, repeatedly being transphobic, so you want to draw attention to it in a way. But on the other hand, why am I amplifying it by bringing attention to it? Do you know what I mean? It's like a double-edged sword.
So it's why I think the way to deal with it sometimes is to talk about the issue, but don't talk about the person.
Yeah, the individual.
Yeah.
Well, I've learned to do that. We call her the wizard lady now, don't we?
The wizard lady. Yeah, we banned the other words.
No comment.
Well, believe it or not, we have been speaking for over an hour. Yeah.
Crumbs. It's been really lovely. It's been lovely talking to both of you.
So, what are your final thoughts, then, Frida? What your final message?
I just think it's been lovely, and it's like great to see somebody who's making positive changes, and no matter what, don't stop.
Yeah, just keep going.
And these things you're doing, like the videos you've been doing and the messages you put out through the network, they mean a lot to us. You might feel sometimes like it's hard because people are piling on, but honestly, it's.
I mean, you have our support, Paul. If you want to come on and talk about something, feel free.
Hey, you're going to make me cry here, so thanks. It means a lot to hear stuff like that, because like I said before, so often all we hear is the negativity. And it really means a lot when you get that little ray of light. And that's why I keep telling people, it's like, do this for each other, be that ray of light for people. If somebody's
I'm going to start singing Madonna now.
Yeah, no, but like if somebody's
if somebody's crying in a minute.
If somebody's done something positive that you like, tell them, because they, you guarantee that people that don't like what they're saying will tell them about it. But it's we don't often tell people the positives. We don't often tell people when they positively affected us. And there was a guy who's just died last year, and he was the first person I ever told that I was gay. He was the first person, and he worked for Outrage in London, and his name is David Allison. And I never told him the impact that he had on me as a frightened teenager in Belfast, and him in the other side of the country. The positive impact he had on me, and that he made me feel like it was okay to be me. And
it's amazing.
And then I went to reach out to him, and I found out that he's passed away, and he only passed away months before this. It's like, I waited too long to tell him that, and like, to tell people now, tell people now if they've done something good for you. Well, tell them now.
Yeah, me and Vicky always say now, because we've been doing the podcast, I think it's since October. And even though we do cover a lot of heavy topics in the news, there's some things we just can't ignore, like, things happen. But we always try and have a couple of really positive stories within the podcast, because, it can feel pretty bleak sometimes.
Some of these topics are quite serious at times. We have to handle them carefully.
You know, when we're talking about transgender people in prisons, it's not an easy thing to talk about, and it's, you know, you can't skirt around the issues there. But then we had that I still go on about this story of, you know, The Voice kids, and you had that
was great.
trans girl.
Yeah.
What was she called?
Was it Macy?
Darcy.
Darcy, yes. Yeah,
and it was just amazing to see a young trans person being celebrated like that. It's like
there's so much to be said for like the joy in our community and the joy in being yourself, you know, and that's it. We need to keep I love that you keep putting out those positive messages, because it's all too easy to get dwelling on like we're surrounded by it. Let's shine a light on each other, you know.
Well, I'm glad we're ending on a positive anyway.
Yeah, we always try and end on a positive story or a positive topic or point.
And I just want to say thank you for doing it and giving us your time.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Paul.
And
no problem. Thank you for letting me on your platform. So
I think our next episode is going to be coming out on Thursday.
We're doing a live one. Yeah,
we're doing a live on Thursday. This is probably going to go out after this, so I don't know why I'm saying this now, but
looking at it.
Yeah. So what was the topic we were going to talk about? I know you wanted to talk about Sam Smith.
Well, I need to talk about this
because he's been in the news the past couple of days heavily.
His new video, their new video is amazing.
Sorry, what I wanted to say about it, what made me laugh was all these pearl clutches just assumed it was we straight away. I didn't even.
It was champagne.
I understand the visual, you know.
It's a nod back
language.
To Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Yeah, of course it is.
You know, like I watched that video just tonight, and I was like, that's Frankie Goes to Hollywood. That's George Michael. That's Elton John. There's a lot of callbacks to queer artists, you know, over the past couple of decades. But the big influence for me, I thought, in that was the Frankie Goes to Hollywood Relax video. Is probably to me the most obvious reference there.
But it's so funny. They walk into these traps, don't they, of being outraged by something, and then there's nothing there really to.
It's all been done before.
You know, it's not.
Yep. It's all been done before.
And so we're going to talk about.
We'll talk about that on Thursday, and then
the media outrage.
And then Sunday we'll be back to the normal news review. Yeah.
Yeah. We're doing a lot this week.
We're doing busy, very busy. Yeah. So I'm going to sign us off.
Okay.
Thank you for coming on, Paul.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
We'll talk
Good night.
soon.
Good night.
Bye for now.
Bye.